Hello, I'm Sheryl McCarthy of the City University of New York. Welcome to One-to-One. New York City has an estimated 40,000 nonprofit groups that are involved in everything from funding after-school programs, feeding the hungry, and providing English language instruction to immigrants, to planning community gardens, creating soccer fields, and reclaiming the waterfront for public use. But with so many organizations competing for funds to support their programs, who can bring order to the process of identifying New Yorkers' most pressing needs and connecting potential donors to the most worthy programs? Enter the New York Community Trust, which has been doing exactly that since 1924. I'm pleased to welcome Patricia Swann, the Senior Program Officer for Community Development and the Environment for the New York Community Trust, to the program. At a time when economic forces are transforming the city and the way we live, what better time to explore the Trust's past and our future? Welcome.
Thank you.
You know, I often tell my journalism students that reporting about New York City is relatively easy compared with other cities because New York has an interest group for every conceivable issue. These interest groups, and a lot of these interest groups tend to be nonprofits. Yes. With 40,000 nonprofits, is New York a kind of model of the civil society, would you say?
I would say that I think New York has a civic culture or a civic fabric that, for one reason or another, the nonprofit sector is just so thoroughly ingrained in it. I'm sure it's a model for other cities that might, you know, for better or for worse, wish that they had the kind of network of nonprofit organizations that we have.
Now, the New York Community Trust was started in 1924. Why then? What was the impetus for it? And what was the mission?
Well, New York Community Trust is a particular kind of foundation. It's a community foundation. Often in other cities and in New York as well, these foundations were started by people who had wealth, who felt a commitment to the community, and who wanted a vehicle through which they could give back and support the community. And so in a nutshell, I mean, there are a lot of aspects to it that are really someone else's purview in terms of the legal structure and so forth, but it is a unique kind of animal in the philanthropic world.
And it's the idea that you support other nonprofits, because yes, presumably all of these 40,000 or so nonprofits they're all competing to get money, and I would assume from some of the same donors.
Yes.
And what's your role in that?
Well, you know, first let me say that the 40,000 includes everything from the, you know, the block association that has a couple of volunteers that do a few special events for the block every year, to, you know, multi-million-dollar operations that are very sophisticated, very complex operations and economic forces as well. The sector in general is a major, major employer in the city of New York. In fact, it's the second fastest growing sector in terms of jobs in New York City, and is a major factor in terms of purchasing goods and services and so forth. So fortunately, not all 40,000 of those organizations come knocking on our door, but there is a significant slice that do. We have roughly $150 million a year in grants that goes out the door. 2/3 of that are donor-advised grants, which means a donor who sets up a fund at New York Community Trust designates that they want some funds, some of their money, to go to specific organizations and institutions. The rest of that pie, 1/3 of it, is really up for those, the slice of 40,000 organizations to compete for. And as a program officer at the Trust, there are 8 program officers like me at the Trust, and our job is to read proposals, to meet with people, to review what they're doing, to basically do due diligence that's needed to make sure that those dollars that are discretionary that we can designate for specific organizations are going to the right organizations for good causes.
And do you give to both fledgling organizations as well as to established ones?
Absolutely.
Okay. You personally oversee two areas of giving, community development and the environment. Now, when I think of community development, I think of urban development corporations that build affordable housing and housing for seniors and support local business owners. Are those the kinds of programs we're talking about, or is it broader than that?
Well, community development is an interesting field at the moment because it's actually been morphing a bit. 10, 20, 30 years ago, community development typically meant an organization that was dealing in some aspect of housing, whether it was services for tenants or actually building affordable housing or helping prevent evictions. You know, a whole range of things related to housing, which of course is always going to be a significant issue here in New York City. But it's now morphing into a broader range of subjects, and so there are a lot of community development grants that we make, that I make, that have to do with economic issues. They might be involved in job training, job placement. They might be dealing with financial literacy issues and financial counseling. They might also be, in some instances, we have organizations that once built housing and are now building things like schools and shopping centers and arts and culture centers. And so community development is a bit, it's morphing and in transition. It'll be really interesting to see the direction that the field goes in the next couple of years.
I read on your website about a grant that you gave to a man who wanted to start his own soap making business. I don't know if that was East Harlem, somewhere uptown. Does that fall under the purview of development?
We've done grants to microenterprise organizations. We wouldn't make a grant directly to an entrepreneur, but we would make a grant to an organization that works with entrepreneurs or micro-entrepreneurs oftentimes in the neighborhoods. And in fact, you know, just looking at the Bronx, for example, which is the city's poorest borough, but is also the fastest growing borough in terms of startups, small businesses, which is, we think, a real interesting angle and approach to anti-poverty strategy. And so absolutely, we wouldn't support an entrepreneur directly, but we would support an organization that promotes and helps facilitate entrepreneurialism.
Tell me about some of your grants in the environmental area.
Environment is also an area that's kind of evolving, and I have to say that I am actually chiefly responsible for community development. I have a counterpart, a colleague, who does most of our environmental grants, Pat Jenny, although obviously there's lots of overlap. But the environment, we do many grants that have to do with environmental justice, environmental advocacy around issues that oftentimes the advocates make a pretty compelling case that poor neighborhoods are subjected to things like waste transfer stations and so forth disproportionately, and so some of our grants have to do with advocacy around that issue. I know that my colleague Pat Jenny has also made many grants. That is one of the few areas that the Trust does that's actually national. And so she's also made many grants around the issues related to wildlife preservation, things around protecting the environment from chemicals and so forth. And so that's a bit of an anomaly in terms of our issue areas in that it is pretty broad-ranging.
I noticed that the Trust gave $55,000 recently to improve the East River Esplanade from 60th to 125th Street. That is that completed, or is that under construction now? It's
underway. You know, the grants that we make are rarely large enough to actually fund capital construction. And in fact, we think that that's government's role. But this grant in particular is about advocating for the city to make that kind of investment in the East River Esplanade, which is this totally underutilized and, you know, in many ways underappreciated potential resource along the waterfront. So our grant was there's been some capital improvements, but they're minor, having to do with fixing broken stoplights and some broken pavements and so forth. But there are other serious issues. The underpiling under the Esplanade is crumbling, and there needs to be some investment in making sure that's shored up. So our grant didn't actually build anything, but it's making sure that those communities along the Esplanade, both the Upper East Side and East Harlem, can work together in making sure the investments are made.
Yeah, I live on the west side, and I use the west side bike path, and it's very, very well developed, and it's getting more and more developed, whereas the east side
Not
looks
so
a little
much.
not so much.
Well, in fact, when I met with this organization, Civitas, that was one of the things that motivated them to take this on as a priority. They looked over to the west side and saw all the wonderful things that are happening there and said, we need that over here too.
So nonprofits submit proposals to you just as they would to the Ford Foundation or
Yes.
to Mayor Bloomberg's foundation, so what are you looking for, in a grant proposal or in a potential grantee?
Wow, it ranges a lot, but I guess you can boil it down into a couple of things. A project that is viable, that makes sense, that benefits a broad constituency. In other words, we don't make grants for individuals or even for individual pet projects. It has to be an organization, a legitimate organization with a board of directors that's responsible to a constituency, whether it's a neighborhood or artist or micro-entrepreneurs or something. And so that's one of the criteria. And then, of course, we also look at the organization. It has to have a bit of a track record. We will fund emerging organizations, but we want to see that they've done some exploration of the project that they're proposing and have some reasonable expectation that they can actually carry it out.
Now, what makes the trust different from, say, Rockefeller Foundation or the Open Society Foundation, or what makes you different from those?
All right, I'm going to try not to get into trouble here. I would say as a community foundation, we are focused like a laser on New York City and the 5 boroughs of New York City and what benefits New Yorkers. And so, with all due respect, I mean, the national foundations, international foundations like Ford and Rockefeller and Open Society are very important, play a very important role. But we see our role as being not only a source for projects and programs that benefit New Yorkers, in particular low-income New Yorkers, but also as sort of an underpinning of the foundation of the nonprofit sector in New York City in general. And I think that's a very important role that New York Community Trust plays very effectively.
We're going to take a short break, and then we'll be back with more with Patricia Swann of the New York Community Trust after this message. Welcome back to One to One. I'm Sheryl McCarthy of the City University of New York, and I'm talking with Patricia Swann, Senior Program Officer of the New York Community Trust. She's in charge of grant making to community development and environmental groups. I was looking at some of the kinds of city programs that the Trust has been involved in supporting over the years. City Meals on Wheels. You're involved in early AIDS research back in 1983 at the beginning stages. You've worked with WNET to fund screenings and distribution of a documentary on the deinstitutionalization of mental patients, which I gather became a model for POV and other programs that public TV stations still use. What new types of initiatives have you started funding in recent years and maybe you didn't before?
Wow. We fund just literally every issue area under the sun. And so I'll put that out there first. So inevitably I will overlook some important initiative or another, but 2 come to mind that are fairly recent. One is we were one of the first foundations to really focus on workforce and job training issues, and in fact have helped to create a sort of a collective group of other funders that are focused on issues how to strengthen and make more effective the workforce development system, how to get people prepared for jobs, how to support the organizations that train them and then place them in jobs, and then how to help the government be more sort of seamless in their support of that work as well. And so the Workforce Funders Group has been very effective at both increasing the level of dollars that have gone to this issue area, as well as knitting the work of the Department of Small Business Services into this work as well. So we're very happy to have them as a partner. And there are many foundations that are a part of that group that I won't try to name because I'll forget one or two, I'm sure. So that's one initiative. And another area I would point out is we had an initiative that's actually sunsetting this year called One NYC, One Nation. One NYC, One Nation. And it's really an immigrant civic engagement initiative. It's designed to make sure that immigrant New Yorkers are part of the civic fabric of New York City and the economic fabric of New York City. We partnered with the Mayor's Office of Immigrant Affairs and the One Nation Foundation, which is based in Seattle, Washington, and we made several very important and significant grants in that area over the past 2 years and are very happy with the results there too. So we take on issues as they come up, and it's always interesting. There's always some new issue area coming up that we're grappling with.
Since you're talking about immigrants, I gather that there are a lot of immigrants who want to learn how to speak English, and that the programs that do that for immigrants are, I mean, there's a big waiting list. It's hard. There are not enough slots, not enough programs. Is that an area that you've been involved in at all?
We've recently made a grant to New York Cares, as a matter of fact, that is partnering with the Mayor's Office of Immigrant Affairs to do, and they're partnering also with CUNY TV, as I understand it, to use a series that was created of different situations, going to the doctor's office, going to a parent-teacher conference, where immigrants are learning conversational English. So they play a videotape of a scenario like that, and then use that as sort of the basis of an hour-long instruction on conversational English. These are going to take place in schools, using volunteers that have been recruited and trained by New York Cares to teach English to people who struggle with English.
And how to operate in specific kinds of situations.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. You also give out nonprofit excellence awards to recognize outstanding management practices among nonprofits. Who were your winners this year?
The winners this year were Bronx Works, which is a wonderful organization, a major force in the South Bronx, providing everything from job training to college assistance to meals, shelter help, you name it, to residents in a very challenging part of the city. One of the winners also is CSH, which stands for Corporation for Supportive Housing, and they help, they're a national organization that's based here in New York City. They work with groups all over the country to help develop housing for people who are vulnerable to homelessness. And then our gold winner, our first place winner, is a wonderful organization called Children's Village, which is based in Westchester County, but works with young troubled teens and young adults from New York City, helping them reconnect with their families and connect with all kinds of services that they need to get their lives back on track.
And it used to be, I remember hearing about it years ago, it used to be a residential kind of facility, but it's moved more towards helping children at home. Exactly.
To keep families together and provide the kind of support that's needed, not just for the young person, but for the family as well.
So where do you get your money from?
The New York Community Trust raises money. We have some 2,000 individual trusts that are set up by wealthy New Yorkers, for the most part, who are committed to giving back to New York City.
And basically you manage the doling out of funds from those trusts?
Yes. We also, I should point out that we also are very fortunate to have a corporate structure that allows us to take grants from other foundations, which happens often. And so, for instance, in the case of the One NYC, One Nation initiative, One Nation Foundation basically seeded that program and matched monies that we were able to raise from other sources. So we get money from individuals as well as from other foundations.
I know that when Brooke Astor died, she left $43 million. I guess that was the remains of what she had not been able to give away, her foundation not been able to give away, to be administered by the Community Trust to support education programs. And you made the first of 21 grants, the first 21 grants from that money last year. What kinds of programs, for example?
Well, I have to confess that that's a colleague of mine who, Sean Moorhead, who is really running that program with the help of a consultant. I know that there's a major focus on early education reading skills, and so a significant amount of grants going forward are going to be around that theme. The first set of grants that you mentioned were a bit more broad-ranging, and they were really geared towards a set of organizations that Mrs. Astor had designated that she wanted to be a part of. She wanted to be able to compete for a significant portion of what she was able to leave for us.
Now, when the trust gets money, does the donor usually stipulate which areas they want the money to go into, whether it's education or environmental or whatever else?
It depends. Some do. Some are totally happy to leave us with basically unrestricted funds that we're able to use at our discretion.
Do you sometimes try to advise, steer potential donors about to places where you feel the money is needed?
Yes, absolutely. In fact, we have a donors unit that works with program officers like me to put together from time to time presentations on issues that we think our donors would be interested in learning about, and in some cases that leave someone to conclude that, you know what, I'd really like to help support this issue that we learned about it. We call them donor briefings, and our last one was on the aftermath of Sandy, the sort of post-Sandy planning for making New York City a more resilient place. So we do those kinds of, about 6 or 7 times a year, we do a donor briefing on an issue that we think our donors should know about, and it does often inform their giving.
Are you seeing a new generation of benefactors, techno-entrepreneurs, for example? Are they?
Somewhat.
Yeah.
I would say I'd love to see more of them, but yes, somewhat. We are seeing some of the new money in New York City.
Mayor Bloomberg has donated probably hundreds of millions of dollars to city programs. How would you access do you get a sense of the impact that his giving has made?
Wow, tremendous impact. It just occurred to me this morning, actually, I was in a conversation and someone said, you know, Mayor Bloomberg has really raised the bar in terms of and of course he has the means to do so, in terms of understanding how government and philanthropy can work together. And, you know, I don't know, I would love to be able to take off a month or 2 or 3 to do a sort of compilation and a research project, basically, on the impact that he has had with his philanthropic endeavors over the years. I'm sure someone is working on that right now. So I can only say the impact's been tremendous, and I hope it continues.
Along those lines, do you have any sense that organizations are fearful that those funds might dry up when he leaves office? Although he set up this new foundation just to give away his money, right?
That's right, and it strikes me that he seems to be totally committed to to playing an important role in that, and so he's not going to be a standby philanthropist, I'm sure. Sure, there's a lot of anxiety in some circles around that. You know, we can only wait and see. I am sure that Mayor de Blasio will have some connections to bring to bear in terms of keeping philanthropy as a major player in the city's pressing issues, especially now given sequestration and, you know, all of the cutbacks that government's making in these kinds of causes.
Is New York a more generous city now than in the past, or less so?
You know, I think it's a generous city. My sense is that New Yorkers are generally very generous from all income range, every spectrum of the income range. I find people very generous with their time and their money to the extent they can be. And so I don't know what it was before, but I know from my perspective it's a generous town.
How did you get involved in this whole philanthropy and with philanthropy and the nonprofit world?
It's in my genes. My grandmother, my mother, you know, were both very involved. My mother was a shop steward for her union. My grandmother was the woman on the block who knew everybody and everything that was going on. And so I guess it kind of got passed down to me. And I've just loved the work. I love the work. I love the city. It's sort of endlessly fascinating. and you know, it's my passion.
Well, very interesting to learn about the New York Community Trust. I had not known so much about it before, and now I know more, and so do our viewers.
Thank you.
We're out of time, but I want to thank Patricia Swann for joining us today. If you'd like more information about the New York Community Trust, you can go to its website, nyccommunitytrust.org. For the City University of New York and One to One, I'm Sheryl McCarthy. If there are any people you'd like to hear from or topics you'd like us to explore, please let us know. You can write to me at CUNY TV, 365 Fifth Avenue, New York, New York, 10016, or you can go to the website at cuny.tv and click on Contact Us. I look forward to hearing from you.